I believe winter is the best time for me. I love winters. It's the cold, dreary mornings for everyone. But for me, those are the pleasant chills that I would trade for any time in any other season. I was born in Alaska, and my father was a woodworker. He taught me everything I need to know about Alaska and woodwork. It was definitely one of the greatest things that I inherited from my father. The woodwork craft he taught me, it was remarkable and became the source of my income as I grew up. I started with making tables and then moved my way up to making designer projects that the rich carved for their big houses, and in return, I got paid a good amount of money, and it made living in that winter paradise more comfortable than it could have been. I was truly one of the few in there who actually enjoyed winter for what it was. I was like the common likable person in the cold town. Almost everyone knew me there because there was some kind of woodwork that I'd done in all those houses. Even in the town, almost everyone knew everyone, so there was this sense of family in there, and I was like part of every single family. It wasn't always the case. That town wasn't really someone would live in. The environment was hostile, and my father told me that something more sinister than once roamed the town. My father told me this story about how his grandfather and how his grandfather and his friends and family were the first people to populate that town, and how much effort it took them to populate the city. It was the story of how they took over the lands. They reached the grounds in the 1800s, and it was their boat that stranded them onto those lands. It was not something that they willingly chose to do as they did, and they realized that there was more to the land than seems. As the men went out to explore and the women stood by the boat side, the men explored that the land was inhabited by something way more dangerous than humans. It was a predator of some kind, and it was the probable reason that the land wasn't inherited by anyone. This town was far away from any civilization, and with the hard conditions, it was almost impossible to sustain life in such parts. They were hunters and survivors back then, and there was no problem that they couldn't figure out, so they worked and made everything possible for them. But this time in this newfound place, there was more to do than just survive, and they did. It was the first night that they saw the creature. It was just a glimpse, but it was big enough to scare them all, and they settled right by the river. One of the men in the tribe drew him, and the recording of what they wrote and what they drew has been kept safe. The creature was by accounts around 8 feet tall, and his body was covered in white hairs, and his footsteps were bigger than usual, and there was this distinct smell about it. It was by accounts a little bit like a yeti, and they were ready to set off sail since the land was almost inhabitable. They decided to leave to find another place to settle in. Then, in the morning, when they woke up ready to move, there were a man down. One of the members of the tribe was hunted by that creature. The signs were all there, and in that moment, they decided to take revenge on that creature and hunt it, and they decided to stop and take revenge. They gathered up and decided to craft a plan where they set up traps through the forest and waited for the creature to get out. But it was stronger, and the only way to tackle it was by going straight ahead in battle with them. And they did. They charged the creature with the spears they made in just one night, and they attacked him and charged him and made sure that the creature never hurts anyone again. And then, with everything that happened, they decided to stay there and settle in that cold place, and then make a home out of it. And now 200 years later, this place has become a home. And guess what is the mascot of our place? It's the same creature. Before I knew the story, I always thought it was just a bear. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
This incident happened to me during the winter season of 2012, when I was in my second year of graduation. I lived in the capital city of Ukraine with my father, mother, and my younger sister, who was just 12 at that time. My grandparents were also alive, but They didn't like the noise of vehicles and crowds of the cities, so they lived in a small village where there was our farmhouse that my father constructed, and only for them. Our farm was not too far from the capital city. It was about 3 hours away from the place where we were currently living. As usual, I was going to my college, and since I woke up late, I couldn't eat breakfast or take a bath. I just prepared my bag and left for college. Luckily, I reached there on time. That day, there was a birthday party that one of my classmates threw on the occasion of his birthday. Many of us didn't want to miss our classes, so after a long round of discussion, we all came to a point where we would go and celebrate his birthday. After our college hours, we all went to the market as planned to celebrate his birthday and had a lot of fun. Since it was winter and it was getting colder by the minute, I took my leave from there and returned home directly. My mother was waiting for me, and as soon as I returned home, she started lecturing me about coming home on time and blah blah blah. She scolded me enough until I started to feel upset. My mood was off after listening to her lecture, so I went directly to my washroom to take a bath. Since it was winter, I couldn't afford to bathe in cold water. So I turned on the geyser and went to my sister's room to check on her. But I found that she was already in her deep sleep. I thought to peep into my dad's room and found that he was packing his stuff. It looked like he was planning to go somewhere. My mother was also standing there, and she was also packing her dresses into the same bag. I was kind of clueless about this, so I pushed the door and asked them directly. They told me that my grandpa was ill and that they needed to go and check on him. That day, first I got back late from college, got scolded by my mom, and now my parents were going out to visit my grandparents. I went upstairs to my room, took my towel, and went to the washroom to get bathed. Before going to my parents' room, I forgot to turn off the geyser. The washroom was filled with steam and white mist. In fact, that mist was giving me the feeling of being in a sauna. While I was taking a bath, I thought I heard something. It was misty all around the washroom, so nothing was visible, but I was sure that I saw something. It was pitch black, and as I was struggling to open my eyes, I saw a ghostly figure with long hair standing in front of me. I was shocked, and my whole body started shaking after seeing that figure. After watching that pitch black figure, my heart just stopped for a second, and out of reflex, I threw the jug at his face as hard as I could. "Ouch!" the figure screamed. "What the hell?" After listening to its voice, I started to wonder, how can a ghost feel pain? I got up from the bathing tub and slowly went towards them. I was afraid and was shaking in my boots, but I wanted to know why that figure screamed like a human child. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was my younger sister who was sitting there just holding her head. It was because I'd hit her with the bucket. And that was when I knew why this ghost screamed like a human and why it felt pain. She was sleeping with her hair open and felt nature's call, so she came to the washroom. She was half asleep, so I didn't think it was right to discuss anything about what I had experienced, so I took her to her room and asked her to get some sleep. After all of this, I was just sure about one thing. Ghosts don't feel pain.
This happened in March of 2011, near my house in a small town about an hour north of Indianapolis, Indiana. I was in 8th grade at the time, and it was during my spring break. That year, instead of sunshine and warm weather for spring break, there was a snowstorm, probably around 8 inches or so of snow. My two friends, my two younger brothers and I decided to make the best of it and just go play in the snow for the day. There was a woods near my house, not a huge woods, but big enough to hike around for a few hours, so we decided to do just that. About an hour into the hike, we stumbled on what looked like an old well, a stone circle about 10 feet in diameter and about 4 feet high off the ground, and particularly filled him with foul-smelling half-frozen water. We threw in a few rocks and stuck long tree branches in it to try and find out how deep it was. We tried with a branch that was at least 20 feet long, or we were never able to hit the bottom, so it was pretty deep down. Now the well by itself wasn't really creepy or anything by how old it looks, and the way it was just sticking out in the middle of the woods was a little unnerving. The part that really terrified us came about 20 minutes after discovering the well. We had decided that we were done messing around with the well and had just started to continue on to the woods, when we all heard something that made us freeze death in our tracks with fear. Echoing through the woods came a loud shrieking laugh. It was a high-pitched grating voice that was still very loud. Despite seeming like it came from somewhere far away, we all just froze for a moment, trying to make sense of what we'd heard. The laugh came again, this time distinctly closer to us, but still not in our immediate vicinity. At that moment, none of us were saying a word. We bolted back the way we came away from the sound in the direction of my house. We didn't stop running for what seemed like forever, and we eventually made it back to my house without any more incidents. None of us had a clue as to what we heard, and none of us were ever brave enough to go back there and try to figure it out. I would love to hear any thoughts about what it could have been, paranormal or otherwise. Juzo Itami was a Japanese film director born in the city of Kyoto on May 15, 1933. From an early age, Juzo's profound intelligence and natural talent was obvious to the adults around him, and towards the end of World War II, educational authorities local to Kyoto selected him as a designated prodigy. This meant he was transferred to the Togobetsu Kagoku Kakyo, part of a government program to foster academic genius. The goal of this class was to reduce scientists capable of inventing and engineering superweapons that would be used to defeat the Allied powers. Essentially, the Japanese government wished to create a class of evil geniuses, and Juzo was one of them. But thankfully, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought the world to an end, and the special scientific education classes were eventually dissolved in March of 1947. Yet, as he grew older, Jews have found himself growing less and less interested in science and increasingly drawn to the medium of cinema. He started his career as an actor in the 1960s, Ginza no Dora Neko, but quickly found himself much more comfortable behind the camera. Going on to direct the 1984 hit comedy The Funeral, his movies became something of a phenomenon in the late 20th century Japan, and were lauded as being funny and insightful. While remaining delightfully subtle, they often told stories that were central to the Japanese character, culture, and way of thinking, such as 1985's Tampopo, which tells the tale of a woman who set out to make the perfect noodle. But after establishing himself as Japan's premier comedic film producer, Juzo turned his attention to more serious subject matter. In 1992, Juzo held a mirror up to Japanese society when he made the film Minbar, a satire which poked fun at the traditional Japanese crime families known collectively as the Yakuza. The name Yakuza comes from a traditional Japanese card game known as Old Oishikubo. Is a game where the aim is to draw 3 cards which add to a total score of 9. The rules of the game are fairly complex, but the worst possible 3 cards to draw are 8, 9, and 3, pronounced Yakuza in Japanese. The implication being that if you're in a situation where you're dealing with the Yakuza, you're in the worst situation possible. In the film, Mendo Jusa wrote that Yakuza as being big dumb bullies with a ridiculous dress sense and a perverse set of morals. A set of morals which they believe made them as appearing as chivalrous samurai, but actually made them look archaic and foolish. The film culminates in the Yakuza family, and Question being completely outwitted by a timid but intelligent female attorney, played by Jesus' wife, Nobuko Miyamoto. The film meant a national laughingstock of the much-feared Yakuza and sparked off something of the judicial revolution in which the police stepped up their persecutions of Yakuza members, while media outlets began to refer to them as a boryokodon, a disrespectful term meaning violent gangs. Naturally, Yakuza clans all over Japan were thoroughly outraged by the humiliating depiction of them, and some even sought direct revenge against Jews. Then, on May 22, 1992, less than a week after the film's initial release in theaters, Juzo was accosted by several members of the Gotogumi, a Shizuoka-based Yakuza clan, who demanded he apologize for the offense that it caused. However, instead of groveling, Juzo was defiant in the face of their threats and refused to be intimidated. The Yakuza then attacked, beating him senseless before slashing his face and shoulder with a traditional Japanese sword known as the wakizashi, one that is similar in design, but not nearly as big as a katana. Used for close-quarter fighting to behead a defeated opponent, and sometimes to commit seppuku, a form of ritually ending their own life. The brutal attack left Juzo with a large scar on his left cheek, one that would become a symbol of his rebellious defiance, and made the director instantly recognizable when in public, as the attack quickly became national news. As you might expect, the attack didn't silence Juzo, and he went on to become a hugely vocal critic of the Yakuza, says flagrant disrespect for Japanese laws and society. The attack on him by the Gotogumi only caused the Japanese government and police to intensify their crackdown on the Yakuza, and a series of high-profile raids saw several 100 Yakuza arrested and charged with offenses ranging from murder and extortion to tax evasion. For the next 5 years, judo was a thorn in the Yakuza side, and it reached the point where several rival Yakuza families actually put their differences aside and met to discuss a permanent solution to the problematic celebrity nemesis. Then, on December 20th, 1997, but then 64-year-old director was found dead just outside of his home after apparently jumping off an 8-story roof in what was deemed to be a tragic event of him taking his own life. A popular Japanese celebrity gossip magazine had recently published an article alleging that Juzo was having a secret affair with a much younger actress with whom he had worked with on several occasions. Juzo denied the accusations in his notes that he had left and wrote that he would prove his innocence in a grand display of protest by taking his own life. This was viewed by some as highly suspicious, and although Japanese homicide detectives puzzled over the circumstances, it wasn't entirely unlike Juzo to react so passionately to a perceived injustice. However, and an interesting turn of events, Juzo, his wife, Nobuko Miyamoto, was subsequently placed under police protection, apparently to keep her safe from the Yakuza. But just why should she require police protection after her husband taking her own life was a mystery that would only be solved after an investigation by an American journalist. Jake Aldestein grew up in Columbia, Missouri, but moved to Japan at the tender age of 19 to study Japanese literature at Sophia University, one of the country's top private colleges. In 1993, Adelstein became the first non-Japanese staff writer at the Yomiuri Shimbun newspaper, where he worked for 12 years. After leaving the Yomiuri, that Ustein published a series of articles on how you can use a bus to Damasgoto, made a deal with the FBI to inform on Yakuza incursions into the US, in exchange for a liver transplant at the University of California, Los Angeles. In 2019, Adelstein published a memoir about his career as a reporter in Japan, Tokyo, Vice, in which he accosts Goto of threatening to kill him over the story. It was a shocking exposure of just how deep the Yakuza influence still ran in Japanese society, and one part of the memoir proved to be a terrifying insight on just how much they hated director Juzo Itami. An anonymous source told Adelstein that Dadi Masagoto, the same Yakuza boss who had ordered that scarring attack on Juzo in 1992, had visited him on the day of him apparently taking his life and ordered him to the roof of the building at gunpoint. He then gave Juzo a choice: jump from the 8-story building and give himself a slim chance of survival, or receive a bullet to the brain, which he most definitely would not recover from. According to the source, Juzo chose the former and leapt from the roof,